Caso ya.
Adelante.
Muy buenos días. En nombre del Vicerrectorado de Investigación de la Universidad de ESAN, les damos la más cordial bienvenida al cuarto y último día de la Semana de la Investigación 2022. Esta tiene como propósito incentivar la investigación de calidad en el Perú y brindarle las herramientas necesarias para desarrollarla en la comunidad académica. Agradecemos su compañía esta mañana a través de Zoom, así como el en vivo de Facebook de ESAN BDI. La dinámica de esta capacitación es muy sencilla. Primero escucharemos a los especialistas, quien gentilmente nos acompañan, André y Melissa Close, quienes nos darán la charla titulada Gaze to Getting Published, How to Publish Your Teaching Case. Finalmente tendremos un espacio para las preguntas de la audiencia, que nos puedan dejar tanto en el chat de Zoom como en los comentarios de Facebook. Primero brindaré una breve reseña de ambos especialistas. André Jung es gerente de relaciones editoriales de Emerald en América Latina y el Caribe. Ha trabajado con académicos y asociaciones de investigación desde el año 2013, año en el que se unió a la empresa Emerald Publishing. Su misión se centra en apoyar a los académicos con información relevante sobre publicaciones internacionales, tales como revistas, libros y casos de enseñanza. André tiene una licenciatura en publicaciones por la Universidad de Sao Paulo de Brasil, certificado en marketing por la Curtin University de Australia, y una maestría en ciencias de la información por la Universidad de Sao Paulo de Brasil. Melissa Close es especialista y es la jefa de Case Commission Emerald Publishing en Norteamérica. Cuenta con una licenciatura en publicaciones por la Emerson College de Estados Unidos y se unió a Emerald en junio del 2018. Previo a esto, ha trabajado en varias editoriales como Harvard Education Publishing Group y Plush Chairs. Desde que comenzó, Melissa ha trabajado en revistas, libros y más recientemente en las colecciones de casos de Emerald. Se dedica a ayudar a autores a alcanzar sus objetivos de publicación y en esos momentos nos acompaña desde Boston, Massachusetts. Muchas gracias, André y Melissa, por estar presente esta mañana. Los escuchamos. Bienvenidos.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Carmen, François, Victoria, a todos los amigos de ESAN. Melissa y yo muy contentos en estar con ustedes una vez más. Yo sé que ayer estuvieron con Néstor Salcedo, que incluso es editor de Jefas, una revista que es publicada por Emerald ahora. El año pasado estuvimos también con el doctor César Sáenz de la universidad, que publicó recién un libro con nosotros, o varios libros con Emerald, ¿no? Entonces, la relación que tenemos con ESAN ya es de muy largo plazo, incluso desde hace muchos años. Creo que yo empecé hace 10 años más o menos, pero muy antes. Yo sé que la universidad estuvo en contacto con Emerald, tanto para temas de publicación de revistas como para alianzas y mucho más, ¿no? Entonces, muchas gracias de nuevo por la invitación. Y hoy la idea es que podamos compartirles informaciones muy interesantes sobre los teaching cases de Emerald, ¿no? Y hoy tenemos la oportunidad de escuchar un poco desde Melissa, que es nuestra expert en el tema, ¿no? Y antes de pasarle la palabra, quiero darles solamente un poco el contexto de la editorial para que finalmente pueda pasarle la palabra. Y yo estaré muy atento siempre para mirar las preguntas y apoyarles también aquí con mi portuñol desde Brasil, ¿no? Entonces, Emerald es una editorial que fue creada por profesores, investigadores y muchos de ellos consultores que estaban ahí en Inglaterra, cerca de la Universidad de Bradford, ¿no? Entonces, por su creación, Emerald tiene en su naturaleza un compromiso y con los temas de impacto, claro, de alguna manera eso incluye a los temas de impacto, de factores de impacto, de situación, pero también impacto social, impacto práctico, ¿no? Hace 3 años, más o menos, hemos firmado un compromiso con las Naciones Unidas y somos parte de un grupo que se llama SDG Publishers Compact, que son básicamente editoriales en todo el mundo que tienen compromisos con los ODS, ¿no? Los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, y mucho de lo que publicamos tiene que ver con eso. Incluso espero que la presentación les anime a publicar en Emerald, ¿no? Y que de alguna manera puedan publicar los casos que han impactado seguramente la sociedad peruana, la sociedad latinoamericana, y Emerald estará seguramente muy interesada en eso, ¿no? Dicho eso, entonces les quiero finalmente comentar que estoy basado en Brasil, pero desde donde siempre contesto a los correos de todos los profesores de la región latinoamericana y caribeña. Caso necesiten cualquier apoyo, estaré atento y a las órdenes para apoyarles con más informaciones. Sin más, le quiero pasar la palabra a Melissa, entonces trato de cambiar para el idioma inglés. So, Melissa, thank you for accepting the invitation to share your knowledge with us. I have just shared some words about Emerald, about us, and I think everyone is really excited to hear from you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and for that very kind introduction. So today, I'm very pleased to be talking through how to publish your teaching case. And as I believe mentioned, I am the Cases Commissioning Lead at Emerald Publishing. So that means I look after our teaching case program, including all of the potential publications where you might look to submit your case. So without further ado, let's see if I can move this slide. There we go. So I've laid out a kind of brief agenda for us to talk through today. We're going to start with a brief overview of the Emerald eCase collection, so you can understand better what we are doing as a publisher and also what my role entails. A brief discussion about why cases matter to hopefully inspire you to start writing cases, what editors are looking for in a great case, common reasons for rejection, useful resources, and then we'll round the entire presentation off with hopefully plenty of time for questions and answers. So for this agenda, my context and my role is from a publisher. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the most common things we see in submissions and some tips and tricks that our editors have shared with us to help you get your case in the best shape possible before you do send it in. And I do have some further information in this slide about some specific opportunities you might look to take advantage of if you're currently working on a case that you are planning to submit. So here is the promised overview of the Emerald eCase collection. So our portfolio has over 2,500 teaching cases, and within that, they're scattered across a couple of different buckets. We have a couple of publications which you see on the screen, including the Case Journal and the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, which I'll talk about at the end of this presentation to show you how you can submit if you choose to. We also have a number of competitions we run throughout the year, including the Case for Women, which was inspired to help promote the production of cases featuring female protagonists, because we noticed there was a lack there in terms of diversity and inclusion within our own collections, as well as those of other publishers. And our collection also includes licensed case collections from partners from around the globe, where there are institutions or organizations we work with to deliver that higher capacity of case studies to our partners all over the globe. And if you're interested in looking at any of these after the presentation, I'm very happy to share my slides with a link to the collection up here. And please know that we also include full teaching note access for faculty across all of our products. And on this slide, I just wanted to briefly showcase some of the partners we work with on the eCase collection, just to illustrate how truly international and collaborative we try to be at Emerald. So as a publisher, we want to ensure that we're providing as diverse a collection as possible. And all of these lovely organizations you see on this slide help us achieve that, either by competitions that we run each year or by licensing their collections. And to pause here, because I've kind of talked at a high level of who we are and what we do and who we're working with, I also wanted to speak about this idea of real world impact, because I feel like it's important to reflect on the purpose of a publisher in this broader information ecosystem that we're inhabiting, and why we do the work we do on the teaching case program in particular. So I think André touched on this a little bit in talking about impact and the SDG Publishers Compact and what's important to us at Emerald, but we are very much committed to this concept of real world impact, and to us, that means the provable effects of research in the real world. So it's the changes that we can see and measure and demonstrate beyond academia. And part of our job, therefore, is to not only make sure that we're providing authors with this great experience when they publish with us, but also being proactive about supporting you in your research and your endeavors. And this is partially why we are so supportive of the teaching case format and method as an educational tool, because we think it really is well suited to having impact by engaging your students, working with companies to research these cases, and making sure that the next generation of business professionals has the knowledge and skills they need to move forward into the workplace. And to help explain this discussion around the impact of cases and why we write cases, I'm going to hopefully play a brief video by our editors of our collections, Michael Goldman and Rebecca Morris. So hopefully this will play and you'll be able to hear it. And if you can't hear the sound, just someone flag me down and I'll try to explain it myself.
I'm Rebecca Morris, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal. I teach at Westfield State University in the areas of international business and strategy, and I'm also the chair of the Economics and Management Department.
My name is Michael Goldman. I'm editor-in-chief of Emerald Publishing's Emerging Market Case Studies collection. I'm also associate professor at the University of San Francisco in California and an adjunct faculty at the University of Victoria's Gordon Institute of Business Science in South Africa.
One of the reasons that I chose to become a case writer is because I wanted the work that I did to have an impact. I wanted it to make a difference. And when you write cases, they're used in classrooms to help students learn to think critically about issues and to make good decisions.
And so in a typical business school, students are exposed to dozens and dozens of case studies from around the world, from different industries, different sectors, entrepreneurs, family-owned businesses, big corporates, startups. And this gives students a wonderful opportunity to understand much more deeply the nuances involved in different types of businesses.
But I also write cases because I'm curious about things. I want to understand why businesses do the things that they do, or why they make decisions that perhaps are different than I think that they should have made. And so it gives me an opportunity to go in depth to research a company and the issues, and to understand various perspectives on the same company.
Of course, as scholars, we know that we need to make an intellectual contribution. We want to make an intellectual contribution through our scholarly output. Case studies and the teaching notes or instructor manuals that support them are critical parts and components of intellectual contribution. And so these are well-researched documents that are published international through double-blind peer review processes that contribute to our scholarly output and that count in many business schools around the world as part of how we make a real impact.
The other thing, too, is as an instructor, I write cases sometimes to fill gaps in the literature. So I have a topic I want to talk about in my class, and I want to illustrate it with an example. And sometimes I can't find that perfect case that does what I want it to. And so sometimes I write a case just to fill that gap, to give my students an opportunity to discuss an important topic that I don't feel is being covered in other places.
So as you consider your research output, as you consider those gaps in your classroom teaching, the opportunities to teach new content, the opportunities to bring in new examples to teach content, and at the same time to do good quality research that is peer-reviewed and published and makes a real impact on students, on practitioners, on the field, I encourage you to consider case studies and the opportunities that they provide.
Okay. I like sharing that video because I think that Rebecca and Michael both cover the topic of why cases matter and the benefits that writing cases can have in terms of impact very well. And I also feel that in my work on publishing teaching cases, I found that the community is quite collaborative and very supportive of oops, I don't want to play again. I just want to go to the next slide. Making sure that the case method is both accessible and that we are trying to make sure that anyone who wants to write the case has the means to do so and is supported in their efforts to get across the finish line of publishing. So with that conversation kind of wrapping it up pretty nicely on why it's good to write cases, what the benefits of writing cases are, I'm going to move into transitioning to talking about how we actually go about the writing process. And I'm going to do that by breaking it down into two parts. So first, I'm going to talk about the case itself, which is one file that you'll typically submit in your submission. And then I'm going to talk about the teaching note and the various elements you should include and tips and tricks to help you develop these to a publishable quality. And before I start talking about the case specifically, I just want to make sure that everyone is working from the same definition of a teaching case in case you maybe have not written one before, or you've not used one in your classes, but they are quite different from a research case, and those differences are kind of crucial to both writing and getting published and knowing what those differences are. So teaching cases, just to be as clear as possible, are an instructional tool used to explore real-world challenges in the classroom environment. They're meant to test students' decision-making skills before they then take that knowledge into the working place. And they wield this distinct literary style written in the third person in past tense that is very much like you are telling an actual story of what happened in a particular business or an environment where this interesting thing happened that you're investigating. So unlike a research case, they are quite as if you were following along a play. You know, you can tell this story, embellish it with all the background information you need in order to investigate the situation. And at the same time, they do remain objective as well of both the organization and the protagonist. That is very important that we're presenting all sides of this story so that students are able to analyze them from multiple perspectives and hopefully have a more engaging discussion by doing that. And hopefully, as if they were directly in the situation themselves, they'll be stepping into those protagonists' shoes to figure out what they think should happen next in this story as making proposals or suggestions based on the facts that they've received. And then a well-developed teaching case is developed with specific learning objectives in mind as well. So you're targeting specific competencies or skills you want your students to showcase or take away from this experience. And they also include the detailed teaching note, which is the second portion of the teaching case, which is meant to enable other faculty to be able to pick up that case and then teach it in their own classrooms without the experience that you as the author have put into writing the entire story, having the entire context. It includes all of the information that you are giving to that faculty member for them to then use it in their classrooms. So just to break it down once more, the case portion is the narrative. It is visible to the students and it includes all the necessary background information in order to then answer any questions, discuss the situation. And then the teaching note, on the other hand, is only visible to the instructor. This will provide the instructions that I mentioned, the objectives, the sample questions, and we keep this confidential to the instructor because we don't want the students to be able to access those sample answers and essentially spoil the case for themselves or think they're going into class already knowing the answer. because there can be multiple outcomes to any situation. And as the instructor, you have the opportunity to kind of lead that conversation as you will with the context provided in the teaching note. So those are the two basic elements. And now I'm going to talk about the elements in the case specifically. So each case portion should have a couple of key things contained within it to dive a little bit deeper. And one of the most important things that you can include is the core dilemma. And I'm mentioning this first because this is really the overriding issue that you are investigating that is pulling all the various parts of your teaching case together. Without this, it is hard to have a publishable teaching case because reviewers will look and be not certain what it is you're investigating, what it is you're wanting out of these students. They want to know what decision is being made and why it is important. So this managerial issue or decision is the thing that requires that urgent attention that is mandating you to write this case and get it out in the world. So, for example, in a given case, a dilemma might be that a company is facing a crisis and they need to find a way through it. Or in another example, a company might be looking to expand but is uncertain of the options. And that's where you bring in your students to help you investigate that and find a way forward. So in the broader context, this dilemma is whatever is at the heart of your case. And as you're going through, you're building in all the necessary parts to support this in particular. It's a very good idea to start with this dilemma in mind so that everything else can just follow and build onto it very naturally. It's also a very good idea to make sure that your dilemma is tied to the learning objectives you will also put into your teaching note. And we'll talk about those learning objectives a little bit later once we start talking about the second portion of your case. Another key element that you'll find in cases is this protagonist figure. So the protagonist is the real person or the organization who the case is following through the story as they encounter whatever troubles this business is facing. So within this narrative style, it's important for you as the author to be, quite familiar with protagonists, but still remain unbiased in your portrayal of them. Not all case studies necessarily have to provide a positive reflection of the protagonist or the organization, and that is okay. It is important to have these cases as well. And as your students are picking up this case and reading it, you just want to be careful that as the author, you haven't put in any information about them that might unduly bias their perception of the events. So we want it very much to remain objective without any favoritism to the company or protagonist or vice versa. The background is a very important thing because it provides the details they're going to be sinking their fingers into and working with. So a good rule of thumb here is that you're providing all relevant details, history, information about the company, the industry, etc., that will allow those students to answer the questions you're eventually going to pose. So something I encourage authors to do when they're looking at the background they're incorporating and wondering whether they have enough or whether it's too much is to do what we call a relevancy test. So that is to look at the questions you are posing in your teaching note, and then go back to the case and then try to answer each question only from the information that you provided in the case portion, potentially, highlighting which bits are for which question. And then at the end, you should hopefully see that, yes, you have used all the information you've provided in the case. It was all relevant, in which case you're probably good. If you have not been able to do that, if you've had to go outside of your case in order to answer questions, you probably need to add in a little bit more background or a little bit more context. And if you have leftover background that you find you haven't used in answering those questions, you can probably cut it back a little bit to shorten your case and make it a little bit more concise if that information, while it might be interesting, is not directly contributing to answering those questions. And then finally, one last important element is the hook of your case. So I mentioned this because starting strong is a very good thing to help make sure that your case gets picked up by other faculty. So when faculty are looking for cases to use in their courses, they're often going to start at the beginning, and there will come a point when they stop reading after they decide, I don't think this is relevant to my course, or it's not what I'm looking for, or actually this had a really good hook. I know exactly what this case is about and it is relevant to my course. I'm going to read a bit further, download it, and use it. So in this beginning section of your case, in this hook, you want to make sure that you're introducing all the key details that you're going to be covering, so they know exactly what to expect. They understand what the dilemma is that they're going to investigate with their students, and hopefully do it in this narrative style that is very compelling and gets them very interested in this protagonist and their story. And I'm going to talk now just a little bit deeper about that hook and some other things to show you how to structure your case around these elements. So feeding on right from that point about the hook, there is great overlap between this and the opening paragraph and establishing the lay of the land for your readers and making sure they've got the necessary details. So something we encourage authors to do when they're starting to write their case is consider the 5 W's in their opening paragraphs. And these are questions around who, what, why, where, and when. So specifically, who the protagonist is that we're following through the story, what the nature or the problem is in this case, why that issue or problem arose, where it is happening, and also when the case took place, including specific dates. So if you are checking off all of these things, all of these details in your opening paragraph or hook, you're probably providing enough information for both the faculty to figure out whether or not that's relevant to their course, and also for the students to understand the story on a kind of macro level and become interested in reading more. So you're kind of foreshadowing, you're laying the environment and foreshadowing this dilemma and getting them very invested very quickly off the bat. And then in the body of your case, this is where you provide all of that background that we discussed. So you've moved on from the introduction, and now you're telling the story usually in chronological order. So this is where you'd include those details about the business or the industry, anything that's relevant. And do be sure to tell more than one side of the story so that students can think of competing alternatives, because that is often when we find the best engagement and best discussion takes place. And then finally, in the concluding paragraph, once you've provided all that information, you've gone through, you've checked everything you need to answer in your teaching note and it matches up, the concluding paragraph should provide a short synthesis of the case to reiterate those main issues or even raise new questions to feed very well into the discussion. It's important here that in the concluding paragraph, you're not actually telling the students what happened. We find that telling them what the company actually did kind of limits their creativity a little bit. Whereas if you leave it off at that question of, what do we do now? They're very open-minded and they will come up with a lot of creative solutions themselves, whereas they might just work towards the real world if they know what the company actually did. So there is a place for that kind of epilogue on what actually happened, but we ask that you include it in the teaching note instead, and you leave the case itself very open-ended. And then finally, exhibits. You are welcome to include any kind of exhibits that support the facts of the case and provide students with key information. I just encourage you to look at the publication you're submitting for so that you know what their requirements are for formatting and how many they allow and whatnot. But they can be, quite helpful and very, very important to conveying the story. On the note of the case itself, I do want to go through just some of the common questions we receive as we're doing presentations like this and as authors are checking in with us before submitting, just to kind of help you understand a couple more details about the case. So something we frequently get asked by authors is, can a case be disguised? And what I mean by this is, in order to publish your teaching case, something that Emerald requires and many other publishers require is consent from the organization or the protagonist to say, yes, I have read through this case and I agree for it to be published with my likeness or my organization's likeness included. So if you're working with an organization and they decide we're not actually comfortable with you sharing this information about our business, or we're not comfortable granting consent for this case in its current format, something that might be discussed is the process of disguising specific details such as the name or the location of a particular company, so that readers going through the case won't be able to directly or immediately identify that in the real world. So this is a practice that's kind of navigated between the author and the organization to help get that consent and make sure that they're comfortable with this portrayal. So the answer is yes, a case can be disguised. We understand that sometimes in order to publish, this is necessary. And if you are doing this in your case, we only ask that you explain in your research methods section how you are doing this, you know, what the conversation looked like, which elements have been obscured, so that we as a publisher and as reviewers and editors can see how that is impacting the rest of the case to make sure that it is still coherent and believable as well. And then another question we frequently receive is, can a case be based on secondary research as opposed to primary research, where you've been in discussions with this organization, you've gotten information directly from them? Secondary research is largely based on public records or anything that is openly available. And the short answer to this is also yes, a case can be based on secondary research. We find that this is often a little bit harder than working with primary research, because you're not in a situation where you can, you know, go back to your partner at the organization, ask them follow-up questions. You're just working off of what's publicly available. And there, it's hard to kind of resist the urge to fictionalize or insert elements of you know, trying to step into the protagonist's shoes. So when you are working with secondary research, we just encourage you to try to not fictionalize, because we do not accept fictional cases. So secondary is fine, fictional is not, and just try to stick to only the known facts. And then finally is, how long should a case be? So generally for traditional cases, we recommend between 5,000 to 7,000 words. And we also have another format called compact cases. So compact cases are meant to be read within about 10 minutes. So you could give them out to your students at the beginning of class and then move right into discussion after they're done reading. So for these, we recommend between 1,000 and 3,000 words. So very concise. And I'll have some resources about writing compact cases a little bit later if that is of interest to you. But something else I should mention is that the teaching note is excluded from these word counts. So the teaching note can be as long as it needs to be for you to convey the necessary information. There's no word limit there. And honestly, I think instructors prefer it to be quite long, quite robust, to know that they're well supported in teaching this case. That's just a general rule of thumb. Excuse me. So now that is kind of a good overview of the case portion. I'm going to talk about the elements of a teaching note, and you'll notice immediately that this slide contains a lot more elements. That's because the teaching note is where you're providing the real robust, you know, pedagogy for them to teach this case. It's where you're providing your own insights as a researcher, and it's the portion that's not visible to the students, so you can really expand as much as you possibly want on these questions and whatnot. So the basic checklist for you to include in your teaching notes is 1, the synopsis. So this is pretty much, you know, similar to your abstract. It describes the context of the case, the dilemma being faced, and the discipline that case is relevant for. So as faculty are searching through by specific subjects, particular courses, they'll be able to identify it straight from the beginning. This is also where you include those teaching and learning objectives. So these ones, you should try to set them very early on in the beginning so you know what you're working towards. And make sure that you have that target audience in mind. So whether this is for undergraduate courses or graduate courses, the objectives vary. And something you could use to help you set these learning objectives is Bloom's taxonomy, which you might be familiar with, ranging from, you know, understanding situations to analyzing and applying different skills. The research methods section is also something that Emerald requires, and many other publishers do, though it's not always a mandated portion, but it is very good to include. So this explains, how you're gathering the data you used in this case, whether any of it was disguised or whether it was primary research, secondary research, and any other information that you feel is pertinent for us to know as reviewers and publishers. You should also include your teaching plan in the teaching note portion of the case. So we encourage these to be about 90 minutes and multimedia where possible, including those facilitation questions and activities or whatever you're using to help your students engage with this dilemma. The assignment questions with sample answers will probably take up the bulk of your teaching notes. So make sure that these are aligned with those teaching objectives. So you're targeting specific things with every question that you're asking and also related to the dilemma being faced. If your questions don't line up with the objectives or the dilemma, that is definitely something that the reviewers are going to pick out and encourage you to edit in your revision. So might as well just make sure they're aligned from the very beginning. References, you should be using recent literature, theory, or research finding to provide the answers to your sample questions and help analyze the case. Instructions for use online. So here we found, particularly in a post-pandemic environment, that courses that are being taught hybrid or much more often online, and faculty are going to case collections and looking specifically for one that they can use in a hybrid or online environment. So we've been encouraging authors to include just a brief paragraph or a couple of paragraphs on how this might be adapted for use in an online environment, just to help those instructors know how they could be used in their own specific contexts. And then finally, this is where you'll be able to use that little epilogue section to tell the instructor what actually happened in this company, what steps they actually took after this dilemma was faced. And this is something that we find a lot of instructors provide at the very end of a class, after all discussion has ended and the students have made their proposals, their suggestions. You can have a subsequent conversation around, this is what actually happened in the real world, and how does that compare to everything we've been discussing in the last 90 minutes, which is really interesting just to contrast and see where it diverged or how it was similar. And these are just a couple of quick tips for what makes a good teaching note. So suggested class times broken down by topics is often quite helpful. So by that, I mean, in your teaching plan, you've got this set of activities or set of questions for the instructor to go through. Setting it up as a table of sorts on how long they should be spending on each particular question or topic is very helpful. So for instance, here, breaking down the first 10 minutes of class, cover this, the last 15 minutes of class, cover this, and in between, if you're doing question by question, you've got 10 minutes for question number 1, etc., and so on and so forth, just to give them some kind of guidelines to follow. Challenging case discussion questions with sample answers are also very important and a really good selling point for faculty to pick up your case. So make sure that they are not simple things to answer. If you're going for a graduate level course, make them rigorous and really going to test their knowledge and their skills. And then also supporting materials such as worksheets, videos, readings, reference material, anything else you want to throw in there is very welcome. Remember that your teaching note is essentially what is going to sell faculty on your case. So your goal in writing should be to make it as easy as possible for them to pick it up and use it. And then some further tips for success are things like classroom testing your case before submission. So after you've written both the case and the teaching note, you think it's ready, that would be a point where you take it to your own classroom, you have your students read it, and you go through all of the activities, and then at the end, you're going to be able to see if there were any stumbling blocks where they needed more information and you needed to go back to the case to provide that, or if the questions could have been harder, or if they were too difficult and you need to adjust them somehow. And also just ask for your students' feedback on their kind of experience going through it and whether they thought it was a compelling story and what they liked about it, what was confusing. This can be really helpful before submission to kind of go back and edit with more objective eye as the authors, it can be kind of difficult to step back, but this helps us do it. And then your submission will hopefully be much better prepared to go off into reviewers' hands. Writing with the target audience in mind is also very important. This is something reviewers are also going to look for. Remain objective and consider all sides of a dilemma, and also ensure those sample questions in the teaching note are supported by the case itself. So do that relevancy test that I mentioned a little bit earlier. I've also got some common reasons cases get suggested to run through. So a really simple one is that they don't adhere to the author guidelines or the aims and scope. This happens way more than you might suggest. So I do encourage you to read through in full just to make sure that you're not getting desk rejected because you missed an element and we need to send it back for you to add that in. Another thing is that the case does not follow standard teaching case conventions. So it doesn't have that really narrative format, or it's more like a research case, and we don't publish research cases. So a couple of other things you should be aware of is that, case characters, after they're introduced for the first time, should be referred to by their last names. And all cases should be written in the past tense with a professional but engaging tone. So I know this can feel a little weird if you've never written a case before, but it is convention to say India was instead of India is. Even though India is still very much a country today in the world, we don't want to date the cases. We want to make sure that this manuscript is an accurate portrayal of things at that specific time. So we do use the past tense for everything. The introduction is too long. Again, we want to get to that dilemma as quickly as possible and cover those 5 W questions. The case is not self-contained. So ideally, students should not have to go outside of your case in order to answer any of questions. You should be providing all the necessary information that they need to answer those questions. Poor quality of writing, such as, you haven't checked it for grammar and proper references, an inadequate dilemma, which we talked about, an underdeveloped teaching note, the case is fictional, which again, we do not publish fictional cases, or it does not have the consent of the protagonist or organization to publish. And that's something we're unfortunately not able to work around, because without that, it opens up kind of a whole can of legal worms. And if the organization then comes back to you as the author, us as the publisher, and say, I didn't give my consent, it's really not a situation you want to find yourselves in. So in the last 15 minutes or so, I just want to talk about some resources for writing and get into some publishing opportunities for questions and answers. So one resource that I wanted to highlight in particular was the Cases Learning Hub. So this is something that Emerald developed in collaboration with our editors, with case writing experts, to help new case writers get published. So if you register for the hub, which is a completely free resource, you will have access to a number of courses that will take you through the process of writing, from all the way in the beginning, identifying a need that you want to address, all the way through to evaluating your case study and getting it ready for publication. This course is entirely self-led, so you can go at your own pace. And as you go through, you will find helpful videos from our editors, infographics, mini quizzes, very engaging tools to help make sure that you're covering all of the areas needed. I find that this is really helpful just for keeping yourself accountable and on track to get across the finish line of publishing your case. And I've included a link to the Learning Hub at the top of this slide for afterwards. And something else we have on the Learning Hub are a couple of other modules as well, in addition to the main writing a case study module. So we also have teaching with a case study. And if you're looking to get more confident about facilitating classroom discussion or using the case method in your class, this is really good to help you develop those skills and feel prepared to do that. We also have a Learning with Case Studies module, which you can actually assign to your students along with any case that you're using. And then they'll be prompted as they're doing their homework and reading that case to really prepare for discussion with these prompts that are included in that. And then we also have a number of useful resources, such as sample cases, which can be really good for helping you see, what another author did really well that you can try to emulate, and also webinars and a handful of other guides. On the note of compact cases, which are those shorter 1,000 to 3,000 word cases, we have published recently the Compact Guide to Compact Cases. So this was written by one of our editors, Rebecca Morris, and it includes, annotated examples, roadmaps, checklists, and writing prompts to help you start and then finish your compact case, because there are differences in writing in such a compact style and making sure that you're conveying all of the information in such limited space. So I've also included a link to this as well. And then briefly, we'll highlight a couple of things specifically from Emerald. So whatever collection you're choosing to publish in, whether it's the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection or the case journal in one of our competitions, these benefits will apply to you if you choose to work with us. So first, our competitions, we run them year-round. We do a number of them for all regions around the globe. It's a really good opportunity to get recognized, receive a prize for your efforts, and also be published in our collection and promoted as one of the winners. We also provide payment to our authors for their contribution. You get to become part of this extremely collaborative community who share ideas and best practices. Dissemination is something that Emerald is certainly able to help out with as an international publisher. We have dedicated marketing teams to help you promote your work, and we're also able to track who exactly is using your case and where it is being cited as well. When you submit with us, you'll find that the experience is very similar to that of a journal publishing research article. So you're going to go through a very similar process on Scholar One, which is our submission management platform. So you'll submit your manuscripts to us. We'll do some basic checks to make sure that all of the files are present and valid. The editor will then do an initial evaluation to make sure that it's in line with our aims and scope, or they think it's a good fit for us. It will go to review. The reviewers will come back. Everything we do is double-blind peer reviewed. And then the editor will then make an accept, reject, or revise decision, where you'll go down the various paths where if you revise, you take those comments that they've provided, you go back through another round of submissions, and then hopefully at the end you'll be accepted because they think there's something of merit in your case, and they're really excited to share that with the rest of the collection. And at that point, you move into production and publication for just a really quick overview of what to expect. And then these are some of our particular collections you might be interested in. So the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection is, I think, perhaps our largest one. This is focused specifically on the unique perspectives and challenges based in emerging markets to make sure that those stories, those unique elements, are available in collections and in case literature. So EMCS is Scopus indexed, which I think is a really good indication of the rigor of our publication and the quality our editors and reviewers try to develop within submissions. We're also double-blind peer reviewed. We accept traditional and compact cases, and we pretty much provide the following kind of requirements for where you're looking for. Everyone kind of has their own kind of checklist as an author to know where they want to submit. And these are some basic things that EMCS provides with a link to our author guidelines if you'd like to know a little bit more. Similarly, our secondary case collection is the case journal, which is the official journal of the Case Association, which is based in North America and is a network of case writers in the region. So it's similar to EMCS in many ways in terms of what it offers. It just doesn't have that emerging markets specific focus. So it's a little broader, but still focusing mainly on the full spectrum of business and management topics. And then I mentioned that Emerald does a number of competitions. I wanted to highlight a couple that are going to have deadlines early next year, in case you want to take advantage of the opportunity. So the first one I would note is the Case for Women competition. So this is something Emerald launched a few years ago in collaboration with the Case for Women, the organization, the Forte Foundation, and MBA Roundtable to help inspire the production of high quality teaching cases with female protagonists. because we noticed that there was a real lack of, award-winning cases with female protagonists, and we wanted to have a competition to help address that. So the submission deadline for this is April 15th that should read 2023. It's April 15th of 2023. And there is a top prize fund of $12,000. So for the top 4 cases, this is one of our top funded competitions. And then we have a number of requirements, such as making sure that you do have a female protagonist, that she is described in a positive way, that there's some kind of discussion of gender in the teaching notes so that the instructor can incorporate that. And if you have any questions about this, or if you want to know more information, either check out the competition webpage or feel free to send me an email after this, and we can have a convo about that. Another competition we're doing is the Indigenous Voices case competition. So this is published in the case journal, and it's kind of along the theme of some special issues we've been doing the last few years in TCJ on highlighting underrepresented perspectives, and Indigenous voices certainly fall into the category of underrepresented perspectives in case literature. So for this competition, the deadline is April 30th, so very close to the Case for Women. We've got a total prize fund of £2,000. It is open to all regions around the globe, and the submissions have to have an Indigenous protagonist or at least one Indigenous member on its author team in order to be considered by our panel of case experts and Indigenous scholars. And then the last one I'll highlight is the CMAN case writing competition. So Emerald, with the partnership of the International Association for Management Developed in Dynamic Societies, is welcoming high quality teaching cases to this joint case writing competition. Our deadline is April 30th of 2023 with a total prize fund of €4,000. And this one is open to anyone from developing and emerging markets. So I've included links to all of those competitions on my slides, and I believe that is the last one I'm highlighting. So we've got just a few minutes for Q&A. Let me take a look in the chat, see if anything's popped in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa, for such a didactic presentation. Ahora pasaremos justo lo que nos indica Melissa a la sección de preguntas y respuestas que podemos brindar a nuestros invitados. A ver, vamos a ver, Melissa. Mientras tanto, voy aprovechando para indicarles a nuestra audiencia que podemos ir encendiendo nuestras cámaras para tener la foto final, ¿sí? Vamos a leer si por ahí hay alguna consulta.
Here, I'll stop sharing so we can.
Ha sido tan clara la exposición que parece que ¿no? Y súper didáctica que tal vez por ahí no hay alguna consulta. Lo que sí nos han preguntado, André, es si se puede compartir la presentación, ¿no? Eso sí, hemos recibido esa consulta.
Sí, claro que sí. Creo que Melissa nos comentó y Melissa, they asked if you could share the presentation afterwards.
Yeah, I would be very happy to share my slides. So I'll send that through in an email right after this, and hopefully you can help distribute to the list.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Carmen, yo tengo una pregunta, caso todavía sea posible.
Sí, por supuesto, André.
Es que acá, por lo menos, yo he escuchado mucho que la gente siempre nos pide algo como, André, ¿cuál es el error más común o qué se debe evitar, ¿no? Que uno debe de evitar para tener éxito en la publicación de un teaching case, ¿no? Entonces sería, y lo traduzco a Melissa. Melissa, there is a question that happens all the time with me, and I thought I would ask you. So is there a mistake that everyone should avoid? Is there any recommendation for authors in Latin America or all over the world that, hey, take care with this? Any tips on that? Thank you.
That's a good question. So I would say the biggest thing to focus on is that main dilemma. They want to make sure that it's prominent and that is robust enough to support a course or a classroom session of 90 minutes. So if the reviewers are struggling to figure out what the case is actually addressing, they're probably going to send it back for major revisions, or they'll decide it doesn't meet our manuscript requirements. Making sure that the case is also written in the past tense is also very important, and we see a lot of authors just not know that that requirement is part of, you know, the typical case method, or they haven't checked the author guidelines for that, but it is something that our reviewers are frequently looking for, and they will be sure to nitpick, you know, any particular like variations from past tense. They'll have a laser eye towards that. So just be sure to have another read through before you submit to check that off.
Thank you. ¿Puedo hacer otra pregunta? No sé si hay más.
Sí, está bien, André.
Es que Melissa nos comentaba sobre el tema de las teaching notes. Incluso en las slides vimos que hay realmente mucha información, ¿no? Entonces que la pregunta va un poco sobre cómo escribir una buena teaching note. Melissa, so I was sharing that the slides on the teaching notes were larger, so it's something we should care about. Is it true that we can use class to develop a case, develop a teaching note? Would you recommend that, like, authors to use their own case before they send them to publication? Do you think it's a good idea?
I would. Classroom testing your case is a really good opportunity to get initial feedback, and also to see if there's anything else you need to incorporate into the teaching note or the case itself to make sure that you've got, you know, all the necessary background conveyed. And if you even like have a colleague take that case and present it as well and see how their students respond, the more the students are engaging with it, the more you'll be able to know before you send it in on where you're actually at in terms of writing it and the case quality. So I would recommend classroom testing.
Thank you. That's really nice.
Thank you again, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope it was very helpful, and I'll send around the slides afterwards.
Ahora, bueno, en todo caso, ahora también vamos a, bueno, ahora sí encendemos nuestras cámaras. Muchas gracias, André y Melissa, por el tiempo, ¿no? Y en realidad por la charla que nos han brindado tan clara, tan precisa, con varios, de alguna manera, apuntes a tomar para los que están interesados, sobre todo toda la comunidad que quiere realizar casos, ¿no? Y que Emerald es un buen, de alguna manera, plataforma para realizarlo, ¿verdad? Cualquier consulta, André, igual déjanos también tu mail por el chat de Zoom y también el de Melissa, ¿sí? Fuera posible, ¿no? Y también indicarles, por favor, antes, ya algunos están haciendo su cámara, Victoria, el tema de la encuesta de satisfacción, ¿verdad? Que es importante para nosotros seguir mejorando las capacitaciones que venimos dando. Por favor, nos ayudaría muchísimo el tener completada la encuesta de satisfacción, ¿sí? Estas se están colocando en el chat del Zoom y en los comentarios de Facebook. Bueno, entonces ahora sí, gracias por animarse a encender sus cámaras.
Ok, bueno. Yo tomaré la foto. Si nadie más va a encender sus cámaras, la vamos a tomar a la 1, 2 y 3. We're going to take one more. So, 1, 2, and 3. Well, thank you, Melissa. Gracias, Andrés, por acompañarnos y muchas gracias a todos los asistentes también.
La Universidad de ESAN y el Vicerrectorado de Investigación agradecen la atención y el tiempo de nuestros invitados, André y Melissa, ¿no? Esperamos que por la tarde nos acompañen a nuestra última charla de capacitación de la Semana de Investigación 2022. Que tengan un excelente día. Muy buenas tardes. Muy buenos días.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you.